Bill 2022. Critical infrastructure is the physical facilities, supply chains, information technologies and communication networks which, if destroyed, degraded or rendered unavailable for an extended period, would significantly impact the social or economic well-being of the nation or affect Australia's ability to conduct national defence and ensure national security. Typically, these assets, Mr Deputy Speaker, are used in the supply of services critical to us all: communications, defence, food and water, healthcare and, of course, critical transport sectors. It goes without saying, therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, that critical infrastructure is pivotal to the functioning and prosperity of every one of our lives and, indeed, the proper functioning of our nation. Any disruption to this critical infrastructure could be devastating to Australian businesses, leading to supply chain and service industry failures affecting us all. Designed to strengthen critical infrastructure assets, this bill will protect the assets to ensure the continuity of essential services in this country. Mr Deputy Speaker, the potential risks of a disruption to critical infrastructure are significant, with the Australian way of life at risk without adequate protections in place. We could see shortages or destruction of essential medical supplies, supply chain issues for food and water, and the failure of our telecommunications network, so crucial to communication in this country. In addition, our transport and traffic management systems could be disrupted, the finance sector could be shut down, and business and government may be unable to function. Mr Deputy Speaker, these are risks that cyber warfare and other threats may pose. They may sound apocalyptic, but that's because they are. Australia is lucky to not have experienced any of these at scale in any significant way just yet. But we cannot be complacent to the very real threats that our dependence on the internet, cyber world and data generation provides for the functioning of society, and those threats are very real. For instance, Mr Deputy Speaker, in just the last 3 years there have been numerous cyber attacks on the federal parliamentary network. Further, malicious actors have conducted cyber attacks on health organisations and medical research facilities. Moreover, logistics businesses transporting groceries and medical supplies have also been subject to attacks attempting to derail these systems. Quite extraordinarily and very concerningly, the Australian Cyber Security Centre handled over 1,600 cyber incidents in the last 2 years alone, with approximately 1/4 of these incidents affecting entities associated with Australia's critical infrastructure. That's 400 times where Australia's communications or food and water supply or defence systems were under threat of malicious activity. The immensity of these risks has itself called for action, and in line with the recommendations made by the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security's advisory report on the Security Legislation Amendment Critical Infrastructure Bill 2020, the bill before us today aims to address these very real threats to our safety and the prosperity of our nation. This advisory report, alongside with other over 12 months of industry consultation, has informed the reforms within this bill. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are 2 key obligations of this bill which I will outline now. Firstly, critical infrastructure entities must maintain a risk management program whereby any potential material risks for the assets are identified and a concerted effort is made to reasonably mitigate their risk. This program would then be reported to a board, council or governing body of some kind who will ensure compliance and effectiveness of the reporting. In doing so, the impact of hazards will be mitigated and the operation of critical infrastructure assets ensured. As the member for Macpherson, the Minister for Home Affairs, noted, this kind of risk management is increasingly important considering the interrelated nature of our critical infrastructure systems, whereby Australia's economy, security and sovereignty are at stake. Secondly, Mr Deputy Speaker, critical infrastructure systems that are nationally significant will have to be declared as a governing body. Due to this, critical assets will be identified and any interdependencies of assets across key sectors will be noted. This will allow for the potential consequences of the asset's failure to be recognised early and then risk managed accordingly. Under this bill's reforms, the Secretary of Home Affairs may require the development of cybersecurity incident response plans cybersecurity exercises to build cyber preparedness, vulnerability assessments to identify vulnerabilities for remediation, and the provision of systems information to build Australia's situational awareness. These reforms are crucial, Mr Deputy Speaker, as not only will they mitigate the initial risk of crisis, they will also improve Australia's ability to respond if just such a crisis does in fact arise. There are, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, other measures within this bill which are being considered as well, and these measures include compilation using feedback received from stakeholders and aiming to improve the efficacy and efficiency of the statutory framework. Some of these measures include amending the classification system of critical infrastructure assets and clarifying their impacted stakeholders who have a right of reply to any ministerial decision enforced. Mr Deputy Speaker, while the government notes the urgency of these reforms, they have been made in a considered fashion with extensive industry consultation. To find the balance of maximising additional security for the nation whilst minimising compliance costs is a difficult one, but I trust that this bill, with so much consultation put forward, has found the right mix. Even post-passage of this bill, the government will continue to collaborate closely with relevant industry professionals to ensure that the reforms are not only effective but do not place any excessive regulatory burden on these entities. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill is a second step in our plan to strengthen Australia's critical infrastructure in the national interest. This bill comes after extensive consultation with industry and will create a risk management program, enhanced cybersecurity obligations for systems of national significance and updated information sharing provisions. The obligations do not apply automatically and must be selectively switched on by the Minister. This bill has been developed by the Minister for Home Affairs and recognises the supply chain challenges that the transport and food and grocery sectors are still managing due to the pandemic. The best approach to managing our critical infrastructure from attacks is partnership between business and government that leverages expertise and reflects the complex and evolving nature of the threat. These reforms are a key part of the government's Cybersecurity Strategy 2020 and help protect the security of essential services Australians rely on every day and the sovereignty of our nation. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, while those on this side are working hard to keep Australia and its critical infrastructure safe, those on the other side are complaining needlessly. In fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, those opposite have come into this debate to complain about us bringing on this important legislation. The protection of our critical infrastructure, however, Mr Deputy Speaker, is not something that can be delayed. Now, just to outline the progress of this legislation and the consultation engaged, the key elements of this bill were first introduced in the Parliament in December of 2020. They were part of the critical infrastructure package that was extensively reviewed by the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. The bill was split late last year and the first half passed. The exposure draft of this bill has been out since the end of last year. The government worked extensively across the summer to consult widely with industry on the further development of this bill, and in particular the risk management plans that form the main element of this bill. The Minister herself hosted 9 roundtables with the sector to hear their views. The important Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security has received several iterative briefings on this bill, including a briefing just like last week on the finalised bill. So it is disingenuous for those opposite to say they haven't had time to consider this bill properly. The bill has been appropriately referred to PGCIS, and they will report back before the bill is debated in the Senate. But let's be clear, this is important and urgent legislation. It is national security legislation. If those opposite want to play political games and whinge and complain in this place, it pretty much sums up their approach. It's not about what's in the national interest. It's all about political point scoring to them. Mr Deputy Speaker, the importance of this bill cannot be understated. In times of ever-increasing security threats, and we can see the world post-COVID is becoming more unstable, we hear from the North, we hear from the Northern Hemisphere that there is potentially a great deal of security issues that are at foot. Most notably, cybersecurity threats. We might feel the Northern Hemisphere is a long way from here, but indeed the cyber world has brought the world closer to us. As they say, we have had the tyranny of distance, we now have the power of proximity. But with that wonderful connection through the internet comes ever-increasing security threats. And we must make sure that Australian businesses and governments keep up and stay ahead of these risks. The Morrison government is committed to ensuring the security of Australia's critical infrastructure. By securing these assets from any shocks, the availability of vital services will be maintained for all Australians. This bill will ensure the prosperity of Australia by ensuring the assets maintaining our way of life are not at risk of any threats, whether that be malicious actors, natural disasters or other perils. For that reason, Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.